Hey everybody, this is Julie at Two Chicks Quilting in Ganado, Texas, and we're here today to give you a tutorial on how to make this awesome bullseye quilt. So the bullseye quilt is very versatile, it's very beginner friendly, and it's very forgiving. So take all of those preconceptions of, oh, everything has to match up perfectly and all of that and toss it out the window, because this project is going to be kind of a fly by the seat of your pants type project. The blocks don't have to be, or the circles don't have to come out perfectly, and it's going to end up with a raggy effect. So I'm going to show you how to make the block, but before we do that, we want to talk about the supplies you're going to need. So I will be posting a pattern in the files of this of the group later on, and then link it in the doc or in the comments of this video. But if you purchased a kit from us, you got all of your background fabric in one piece. So you got 3 yards of background fabric, which is this awesome batik. If you have a kit from a previous time we did this quilt, or you're making it up on your own, you have options. So the previous kit we made, as you can see, the background fabrics are all different. So it's very scrappy. So you can use just a variety of scraps. You can use different tone on tone, like low volume prints. You can use a bunch of black and whites. You can use anything you want for that. You are going to need 30 to make it this size. You're going to need 30 10.5-inch squares. So if you have the kit that we just made, that you have 3 yards of the background fabric, you will end up with a couple of extra strips. So you can even make a few extra blocks to cut up and make your quilt just a little bit smaller. So the way I laid this quilt out is a little different. So I didn't make a bunch of just squares and blocks like this. I actually laid my quilt out, which we're going to play with layout in a little while, but I laid my quilt out to where we had these little pieces of squares going other directions, so that it wasn't full circles all the time. Like, here's a full circle, but this isn't a full circle. So the circles kind of play into each other. So you can do a ribbon design, you can do all kinds of different stuff, and we will go over design layout later. So just keep in mind, our goal right now when we get our blocks cut is to go ahead and we're going to piece our blocks, and then we're going to end up cutting them into these, what I call quarter squares. So that's what we'll end up with once we get done. So one thing also you want to think about with fabric is, in our kit we're using shot cotton, which is a woven cotton, a woven fabric, and you can tell, let me find Ashley a good piece to show you guys. Here's a good one, Ashley. So shot cotton is a woven fabric, and the fibers are woven together, and a lot of times the fibers are 2 different colors. So as you see in there, this one is green and turquoise. So as it weaves together, it looks green, but if you look at it really close, you can see a touch of turquoise. And if you look at that selvage, you can see that that turquoise fibers are sticking out. So then when we know when this fabric, when you wash it and that kind of frays out, you're going to see a little bit of both colors. So it's going to be really cool in that aspect. You can use just regular quilting cotton on your circles as well. I have quilting cotton in here in my circles on the top, and then I used wovens underneath that. So the wovens, and we're going to zoom in on this quilt in just a minute when we take it down, but the wovens frayed a little bit more than the quilting cotton did. So it's just dependent upon what you want to do as to what fabrics you can use. You can use anything. I have seen denim as the background. I have seen denim on top of denim to do the circles, and then when it frays out, you know, denim looks pretty awesome when it frays out, and made into a rug. So you can do anything with this block. You can make a table runner, you can make a bag, you can make a full quilt, you can make a rug, you can do tons of stuff with it. So just keep that in mind and keep an open mind as you take this block and work through it. I think that was all on the fabric I wanted to touch on. Okay, so let's talk thread. So of course, when we piece this quilt together, we're going to want to use a 50 weight thread. But what we're doing first is we're basically going to top stitch. And I'm going to let Ashley show you guys on this block. The top stitching, we really want it to show off. So I suggest playing with some other thread options. So what I'm using today is going to be a 40 weight King Tut, which is by Superior Threads, and it is what we generally use for our long arm quilting. So it is a thicker thread. It's also variegated. So it's going to give you that cool variegated thread look because you are going to see these stitches. They're going to be on top. So now's the time to play around with some heavier threads and see what kind of effect you get from it. Also, Aurifil, we carry Aurifil 28 weight. Now you'll know it's 28 weight because the cone is gray and it is a lot thicker. And I'm going to have Ashley show you guys a close-up, the difference between the 28 and the 50 weight. The 50 weight you want to use to piece with, but when you want your stitches to really show up and pop, use that 28 weight or a 40 weight, something that's a thicker thread that will go ahead and let those stitches look really pronounced. And we are going to get this quilt down. Let me see if I can do it without having to get the ladder. I think we can do it. Got it. Okay, I'm going to show you guys a close-up of this quilt. Is that focused okay? So this quilt frayed out really nicely after it was washed. I'm trying to hold it up and show you guys. And as you can see, like this was regular quilting cotton. These were a woven fabric. So it frayed out really nice. Now when I quilted this, or when I stitched these together, I used some decorative stitches in places. So as you see here, I used a pretty decorative stitch. I used that on some of these blocks, not on all of them. There's another one right down here I see. Like here I just used a zigzag. I also used different color threads. So it made it interesting. It gave it a different look. Also, when I quilted it, as you can see, I went in and just free motion quilted all of my background space. So this really doesn't have any quilting in it except for the fact that I put a row of circle in there to just stitch down the center of that block. That's the only quilting it has, is just that little circle. And then I did free motion stipple all around the background. And it just lets these circles pop. So see here we have a little half moon right there and right here. And then I just went on out and finished stippling. And then when we got out to the borders, I did just a straight piano key. So it turned out really pretty. I thought this was my first really custom quilt and custom quilting job, and it turned out pretty good, I thought. So I'm going to lay this quilt back over here. So if I want to refer back to it, I can. But right now we're going to talk about how to do that block. Okay, so I'm going to get situated here. And I think, Ashley, as long as they can see me, you're good. Okay. So we're going to start with our background squares. Now, like I said, these are going to be 10.5 inches. Here's the deal. I'm doing them 10.5 inches. If you bought my kit, that's what I figured your fabric to be, is 10.5 inches. If you are making this out of your own fabric, you can make those squares however big you want them. You can make your circles however big you want them. You can make them larger, you can make them smaller. Totally up to you. So we are using the Martelli circle templates. We showed these yesterday on our sale. They come everywhere from 2.5 inches up to 9.5 inches. So you could cut a 12-inch block and cut your circles starting at 9.5 inches if you want. However you want to do it. Do you have to have a circle template? No, you can wing it. You can have wonky circles. That is totally up to you. You can freehand it. You can do whatever you want. You can use a plate and saucer to trace out your circles. Totally up to you. These templates, though, I'm going to show you make cutting circles a breeze. So I have I don't want to cut my squares I've already done, but I have my background squares cut. The next thing I'm going to do as far as my pattern goes is I want 3 sizes of circles. I want an 8.5 inch, a 7.5 inch, and a 6.5 inch. Those are going to be my 3 sizes of circles. That is exactly what we did in the quilt that I just showed you, the Bonnie and Camille fabric. So I started off with a 7-inch block to cut my 6.5. I'm going to do an 8-inch square to cut my 7.5. So this is how you do it. You have your 8-inch square. You're going to fold it in half, lining up your edges. You're going to fold it in half again and line up your edges. Where your folds are, you're going to take this template and you're going to line up those straight edges with your fold. Then I'm going to take a good sharp blade. Don't forget, before you get started on a project like this, change your blade. Have a good sharp blade. And then we are just going to cut this as we rotate that around. Didn't go all the way through. I must not have a good sharp blade or I've worn it out. So that's how you cut that out. So now you have the perfect circle. So these templates are awesome. Quick to cut things out. Now I have my 9-inch square, so I'm going to use my 8.5-inch circle template. I'm going to line up my edges, line up the straight side of my template with the folds in my fabric. And just cut around that curve. And there you go. You have a perfect 8.5-inch circle. So that's how you cut your circles. You're going to have 3 circles for each background piece. Now let's talk about how do we put these circles onto our background. So I'm going to show you. Let me move the others out of the way so we don't get confused. We're going to start with our background square first. And we are going to take our largest circle, which in my case is 8.5 inches, and I'm going to eyeball it. I'm not going to get my measuring tape out. I'm just going to eyeball it. Keep in mind, you're going to have a 1/4 inch seam on each side. So just as long as you're somewhere in the middle, you're fine. One of the most important things I will tell you about stitching onto a circle is you want to decrease your stitch length. Number one, that is going to help you make a good tight stitch so that when this does fray out, you're not going to worry about it fraying past that stitch line. The other thing it's going to do for you is when you're stitching a curve, the shorter that stitch length is, the easier it is to make those curves. So keep that in mind. The woven fabric does not have a right or wrong side to it. This background fabric is a batik, so it doesn't have a right or wrong side to it. So I don't have to worry about that. But if I was using something that did have a right side and a wrong side, I will want the right side facing up and I want the right side facing up. So this now is going to go to our machine and we're going to top stitch it. Now I don't want to I like to hold my tail because I don't want that thread to suck down to the bottom and make an ugly rat's nest. So I have decreased my stitch length. I am also going to decrease my foot pressure a little bit on the Bernina. It's very easy to adjust. If you have a dual feed on your machine or a walking foot, this is also a good time to use that because it just feeds your fabric so evenly. You don't have to be right on the edge of this. You want to give it room to fray and give it some character. So I'm using a little more than 1/4 of an inch around the edge. So I'm using the back side of my foot to kind of line up. I'm going to hold my thread so it doesn't suck it down, and I'm just going to start stitching. You can go pretty fast around in a circle. If you get to a point where your fabric wants to pucker on you a little bit, just stop, raise your foot, try to straighten it out the best you can, and keep going. If you end up with a little fold, it's not going to matter, because in the end, you're not really going to see that. I got a little wide there. So as I come up on where I started, I am going to put a couple of back stitches there just to secure that thread. And I'm going to trim that thread tail off from the beginning. Now I have my first circle stitched on. At this point, we want to trim from the back side. So you're going to take your fabric and just kind of pull it apart in that circle. So just get a hold of that background fabric. It's easier said than done. And pull it apart. So you kind of have, you have the front circle in one hand and the back circle in the other hand. Now here is a tip. You can snip a hole in the middle and cut out to the edge and trim that circle out. You'll end up with something that looks like this then. That's not really usable. So as I was doing this later on, after I thought about it, I decided, there's times that we want to, if we could conserve what we're cutting out, that's reusable, right? So you could reuse these circles that you're cutting out in another area. So what we're going to do is we're going to go up as close to the edge, about 1/4 of an inch away from that stitch line in the middle, and snip us a little hole off to the side. And then I'm just going to carefully cut that out. Does it have to be perfect and neat? No, because this is going to be on the underside of your quilt. You're never going to see this once you get it quilted. So what this does is reduce bulk. Now, on my previous quilt I made, I didn't trim any of my circles out, and it was just fine. I did stitch it on a Bernina, so I know that, my Bernina doesn't mind having thick layers to stitch through. If your machine struggles with layers, you want to make sure you're cutting out these pieces. So now I have that cut out. I can set these aside, and I can use them later on in somewhere in my quilt. I can, I could even, instead of doing that third circle, I could cut this one down and use it out there on the outside as well. You can use that any way you want. You could use it here. I have 2 of them now. You could use it here and then come back over it. You can use these wherever you want, or you can just put them in your scrap bin. It does not matter, but I just wanted to show you that trick so that you don't feel like, oh my gosh, there's so much waste in this quilt. Now, this next thing I'm going to tell you is just me being picky, I guess you could say. So where I started and where I stopped, I can see that it's a little thicker right there because I went over my stitches and I backstitched. So I'm going to try to start in the same place each time. And then when I cut these circles down, I'm going to see if I can put that on one of my cut lines. So that little backspace spot isn't shown anywhere in my stitching. That's just me. It does not matter because you're never going to see that later on. It's just my way of thinking. I'm going to go ahead now and center that next circle in there and stitch it around. And I didn't have my stitches quite as short as I do today yesterday when I was working on this, and I was having a little more trouble with it wanting to pucker. So this really does, I'm at a 2.0 as my stitch length, so it really does help that. So now I have 2 layers here. I'm going to cut out the green in the back. I got a hold of it and then I dropped it. Okay, so I'm going to pull out my green, pull out my gold so I don't snip it in the process. I'm just going to snip a little hole back here. And then I'm going to cut that out. Now I'm using the Karen K. Buckley medium scissors. I love these scissors because they have a serrated edge and they have very sharp all the way to the tip. So I don't have to struggle with cutting this because these scissors just really do the work for you. So now you have another circle of the woven fabric. Again, once you go to another square, you could use that circle as your smaller circle. So, you know, it's not necessary that you cut all your circles up front as you start. You can cut a few to get you started, and then as you trim them out, you can reuse those if you want. Totally up to you. Or you can put them in your scrap bin and use them for something else. Possibly a pieced border, something like that. Now here's something that I ran into yesterday. I want to put this third circle on, but I can't see any of my stitch lines. So I feel like maybe that circle's a tad bit too large or I stitched too far away from my edge. So I'm going to make this particular circle just a wee bit smaller, and I'm just going to fold it back in that fourth and use my scissors to just give her a little haircut. We're just going to trim a small amount off. Like I said, this is a very forgiving project, and it does not have to measure up. It doesn't have to match up, because guess what? When this frays out, that's going to shrink that circle up a little bit, and you're going to see that stitch line. So I'm going to go back and start stitching again right about at the same place, because that's just how I am. So now we have all 3 stitched together. I have done one of 2 things. I have left both that second circle and the outer circle intact in some of my blocks, and some I've trimmed it out of. It just depends. Sometimes I forget to trim a layer. It's okay. It's going to be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and trim that middle circle out so that in the middle I only have 1 layer of fabric. I'm going to have multiple layers as they stack on top of each other, but you're not going to have a really thick square or thick fabric all the way through the square. Now, can you do more than 3 circles? Absolutely. So the more circles you do, the scrappier it's going to be. You could go back there with another circle if you wanted to. So totally up to you how you do it. We're keeping ours at 3 circles. So the next step is to go ahead and press this. I just want to give it a good press to get any wrinkles out before I go to trim it. A ruler. And can you give me Marley's off the table up there? Sorry, I failed to get my ruler. We're going to get that, and then I'm going to show you how we're going to trim this. We're going to cut it in fourths. We're going to cut it equally in half both ways. Now, I know that my squares are 10 1/2, whatever your squares are, that's what you need to figure out, and you need to divide that in half. So I know I need to cut mine down to 5 1/4 by 5 1/4. So I'm going to do that. Again, here's my little start points where I tried to keep them all right there lined up. So now when I cut, that's going to be hidden in my seam line when I sew these together. That's just me. Don't worry if it's not you or yours doesn't work out like that. It's totally fine. Now be careful when you're doing this, because I cut a couple of mine wrong a while ago, but that's okay because I have extra blocks and I can fix that. My ruler slipped and I had a mess. So that's how you're going to cut those apart. And then you have 4 quarters. Okay. Now it wouldn't be, if you wanted to leave yours whole and you wanted to have just sew these together, then circle after circle after circle, you could do that. I personally think it gives it a better, scrappier look if you go ahead and take one of each colorway and mix them up. Now I kind of like to do this. So notice my background fabric is striped, has a stripe look to it. It's not really a stripe, but it does have a stripe look to it. So I want to take my blocks and I want to make sure that my stripes are going different directions. I don't want a whole bunch go in the same direction and then 1 or 2 that are going the opposite direction and then a whole bunch. You know, you want it to kind of look different throughout the quilt. So if you want to make a full block of a circle block, you're going to pull fabrics from 4 different colorways and put them together. So here we have 4 different colorways and we're going to sew them together just like you would any other quilt block. So I'm going to lay them on top of each other, line up my corners. Now, if this doesn't, like this first block was a little bit smaller, I just kind of stretched it. It's fine. It's going to be fine. Now at this point, I want to change out of my 40 weight thread and I want to put some 50 weight in because I do not want to piece with that 40 weight thread because it just takes up too much space in my seam. So I am going to replace my top thread with the my 50 weight thread. Now my bottom thread, my bobbin thread has always been 50 weight. Even when I was stitching with the 40 weight cone, I still had 50 weight in my bobbin. Another thing, going back to this cone, I have it on a cone spool. If you are sewing with a big cone like this, either your machine has to have a cone holder or you need it on a separate little cone stand because this thread has to come off the top of that cone just like that. So just keep that in mind. But I'm going back to my regular 50 weight thread and I'm going to do a 1/4 inch seam here. I'm going to put my next half of my square in the. Now notice on this one I didn't trim, so I have double layers on this side. It's okay. They're just going to stitch right in there. This is my continuous piecing method. I'm only doing 1 block, so it doesn't really give you a full grasp of it, but notice that my block is together. So I don't have to remember which 2 halves did I put together because I've got them connected still. So the first thing we want to do is we want to press opposite ways. You want your seams to be pressed opposite ways for each half. So we're going to do that because we want these seams to nest. If you had your fabric folding pin or your acorn pin, that would be really good when you're pressing these seams because it would give you a very flat press. So now just fold it on over and that seam is going to nest perfectly, and you don't even have to get a pin out to pin this together because that little piece of thread is holding that center together. So I'm going to line up my ends. Mine slipped just a little. It's okay. And now I have a perfect block. I have my block. I'm going to press it. It's not perfect. I said that wrong. I don't have a perfect block. At this point, if you want to press that seam open, if it helps reduce bulk for you, you can totally do that. I'm just pressing mine to one side right now. And that's how you can make a full block. Now let's talk about other options. So maybe I don't want full circles. I want to do something like what we did in this previous quilt. So I can take the blocks that I have, and let's talk about how you can lay out your next blocks to where they're not quite so perfect. You can start by going randomly and just start laying out your quilt. Where you lay each quarter square. Well, it would help if that was right side out. Had it backwards. You can lay your quarter squares down and give it just a different look altogether. However you want to do it. I have to get down to some different colors. Let's see. Let's do it this way. Then you could come in here, finished block. You know, you could do that. You get the picture. You can lay these out however you want. And I'm not being very careful about my colors or which way my stripes are going right now. But you could lay those out to give yourself a really good variety of how you lay this quilt out. I wanted to make sure you guys could see that. I'm going to go ahead and move the camera up. So you can continue this on. If you're thinking quarter squares, you're going to go 10 across and 12 down. If you're thinking full squares, you're going to go 5 across and 6 down. It's the same amount. It's just how you're sewing them together and laying them out. If you want to leave everything cut up in your quarter squares and lay it out, you can be very scrappy, and then you can just sew those together in rows and columns. But if you want to sew, be very simple, you can just make your squares and you can lay them side by side and stitch them together. Totally up to you how you do this. So you can leave them plain, stitch them into fours, put them together. You can be very scrappy and lay out your quarter squares so that it has that different look. And I want to give you one more option, and that is a ribbon. I'm going to leave these here so you can see that. But let's think about a ribbon. I have to think about it, so be patient with me. Goes like this. Like I said, I have to think. It's going to go like that. So then you would do the next one, the next row, kind of echoing it. Now this is something I would want to lay out definitely before I started sewing it together to make sure that I had it all figured out. I do too. I really do. And we are debating around here how I'm going to do mine. But again, you're going to play with that on your design wall and figure it out how you want to lay that out. So tons of options. You can do plain squares and just circle after circle. You can mix it up and be kind of crazy like we did with our Bonnie and Camille quilt, or you can do a ribbon down the thing. Another thing to think about, if you wanted to use this as a flower, that could be your flower, and then you could do a little applique, couple of squares with an applique stem and leaf at the bottom. I've seen that done. So there's tons of options to do with this technique. Have fun. Don't beat yourself up. Use your machine to put some decorative stitches on there. Play with some thread. Use something different than you've never used before. I'm always here telling you guys to get out of your box and try something new. This is one of those times. Most of you have probably never worked with woven fabrics before. I love them. They're super soft and they just have a different texture. So I can't wait to finish my quilt and get it completed. And when I do, I will be sure to post pictures and go over another video, maybe with me quilting it. I do plan to add a border to it. Now, we didn't include in your kit extra fabric for borders. However, Nicole finished cutting my circles and had quite a bit of the fabric left over. So if you decide you want to make yours bigger and you bought our kit and you want some more background fabric, we have plenty of that. So you do have some extra fabric here. I plan to use this as not only a scrappy, I'm going to do something as an inner border out of this. I'm not sure if I have enough of just one color, so it may be a different color on each side. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but it will be out of my scraps. And then I'm going to come back with that batik that we used for the background, and I'm going to put probably a 4.5, 5-inch border on it. You don't really have enough of it left over to do a border, but again, we do have more of this fabric in the shop. If you happen to buy one of those kits and you want more for borders, just let us know. But you can, again, use your scraps to make some sort of scrappy border. So lots of options here. And I hope you guys have a lot of fun with it. And don't beat yourself up to stay in, within the rules of quilting on this one, because there's no rules with this quilt. Cut those circles out, use your scraps. After it's done and I quilt it, I'm going to custom quilt this one again and wash it. We will all see how all of these will fray just like that other quilt. So I will be sure to get back with you soon as I get it finished and let you see the finished product. But we will see you guys later. Y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye.